You're listening to the Churchosity Podcast, where we talk about the Gen X take on church culture. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Churchosity Podcast. My name is Heath Brady, and I'm your host.
And my name is Andrea Brady, and I'm your co-host.
We're a couple of Gen Xers trying our very best to give you our perspective on church culture. And this podcast is dedicated to the Gen X Christians.
You know, the ones who just want to keep it simple.
The ones who just want to live quiet, peaceable lives.
We represent the generation of Christians who sometimes looks at what others are doing and thinks, whatever. But as it says in 1 Timothy 1:5,
the goal of our instruction is love, from a pure heart, and from a good conscience, and from a sincere faith. Well, Andy?
Yes.
How's it going?
It's going fine. It's going well.
I hope that I'm not the only one here, but I am just still absolutely soaring on cloud nine from Easter Sunday. Just Holy Week in general.
Yeah.
I was talking with one of my pastors today, and I told her, I says, you know, I can't wait for next year. Like, it's kind of sad that Easter's over. We had such a great week of Holy Week.
Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've been in a church that celebrates Holy Week.
Yeah, well, I've never been in a church that celebrates Holy Week, so it's been a long time for me too.
Yeah.
But man, we just had such a great weekend at church. For those of you who don't know, the job that I have, I'm in charge of children's ministry and youth ministry at our church. And over the weekend, we got the just blessed opportunity to serve the general Salem community from our church building and property. On Saturday, we had a free all-community Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
And man, there were thousands of Easter eggs and candy just flung across the soccer field up top. We had close to 400 people show up for that Easter egg
gosh.
hunt. Yeah, it was
it
great.
Really that many? Wow.
Yeah.
That's
well,
so
the
exciting.
official count was 381. So yeah, close to 400.
Yeah, we also had volunteers and things too. But.
Yeah, well, with the volunteers all together, we had over 400, well over 400 people there all together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But shout out to the volunteers who we could not have pulled that event off without their help. That is definitely for sure. But then on Easter Sunday, besides having 4 Easter worship services starting at 7 a.m.,
yeah,
the youth put on an Easter breakfast where we served cooked from scratch biscuits and gravy, sausage links, scrambled eggs, some cut up fruit. We had coffee, orange juice, and water. But it was a fundraiser for the upcoming youth retreat. And
nice.
Man, it was just such a neat thing. It felt like a big family reunion dinner for breakfast all morning long. It started at about 10 minutes to 8 in the morning and went until 11:30.
Yeah, it was busy.
Yeah, it was very, very busy. And we had tons of the youth came out to volunteer their time to serve the meal and wait on the folks from our church and those who were coming to church. And
that was really nice to see.
Yeah, we had great response. And just walking around and chatting with all the families and stuff, just how much of a blessing Saturday and Sunday was to everybody. We made a lot of hearts happy over the weekend.
Did. Yeah.
It was really, really great. I'm still flying high from it. And I told my pastor today, I said, man, I can't wait till next year because it was just such a great week.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I love that.
Well, we got some stuff that we want to talk about. Some stuff that has been kind of on the back burner, I would say, for quite a while.
Okay.
We have some things that we've wanted to talk about. So
Been simmering back there on that back burner.
Oh man, yeah, and I would argue that this conversation that we are about to have is something that has been in the works for many, many years. And I have just been more or less chomping at the bit to have this conversation, but the timing needed to be right. I think that we should just get right into it. So, Andy, one of the things that you and I did a couple of days ago, you and I went to go see the new Fantastic Beasts movie.
We did.
I absolutely loved it. I was so excited for this movie. It's Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore.
Oh.
And if you are a fan of the Harry Potter franchise, you will know that these now three Fantastic Beasts movies are prequels to the time period of the Harry Potter canon. Mm-hmm. And Dumbledore, who is like the main professor of Hogwarts, a very central part of the story of Harry Potter's journey, this is about a lot of the things that we didn't know about his backstory come out in this movie. And
yeah, it was pretty interesting.
It was really, really cool. But as we were sitting there watching this movie, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be like an aficionado and knower of all things Harry Potter world. But I know some stuff because I've seen the movies many, many times. I've only read the books through midway of book 4, so I have not read all of the books.
How many books are there? I forget.
There are 7 books.
I probably got halfway through the first chapter of the first book.
Okay. Well, there is this thing that kind of comes to the surface in the Harry Potter story about midway through the 7 books, where there is this battle behind the scenes, this war, if you will, behind the scenes between the pureblood, or those who are the offspring of parents who both have magical abilities.
The wizards.
The wizards and the witches.
Right.
There's a battle between those people who believe that there should only be purebloods, and then those who are not purebloods, especially those who are what they call muggle-born, or they are children who have gifts, but their parents do not. That always just kind of bothered me, and the way that in the Harry Potter movies, the way that they spun it, it was kind of comical. There was, a little bit of underlying humor and some sneakiness going on to kind of get over on, quote unquote, the bad guys who, wanted to do away with anyone who wasn't pureblood. Well, as we were sitting there watching this Fantastic Beasts movie, it dawned on me. Now, again, I said these are prequels, so this is long before Harry Potter shows up on the scene in the story of all things Harry Potter. It dawned on me about midway through this movie that the villain in these movies, these Fantastic Beasts movies, which, by the way, there's going to be a total of 5, the villain is a character by the name of Grindelwald. And it dawned on me halfway through this movie that this character may in fact be the originator of that war of the purebloods versus the muggles. And how he is developing this following and seeking the destruction of anyone who is not pure blood or pure magical. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because it made me realize something, listeners of Churchosity. It is in human nature, it would seem, no matter where you come from in this world, that there is some power, some people, some motivation behind an effort to segregate people or seclude people or cut people out based on where they come from or what their heritage is, what their genealogy is, what their ethnicity is.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah. It's in human nature.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here watching this movie for entertainment, and I get hit with this like morality check. where is all this coming from? What is it that I'm getting at? Well, this is definitely going to be at least a 2-part conversation. We aren't going to be able to cover the entirety of what I would like to cover on just this episode. So there will be at least 2, if not 3, but there will be at least 2 episodes to have this conversation, and we'll see where we go from there. A couple of months ago, I was, falling down the rabbit hole of Twitter one day.
Oh no, not Twitter.
Somebody had tweeted, name something that you were taught in history that you honestly don't believe really happened.
Okay.
And so I was curious. And so curiosity got the best of me, and I started tumbling down the rabbit hole and trolling the comment section. And there was a lot of, bizarre things in there, I won't repeat, but there was one that stood out to me. One person responded and said, "The Holocaust never happened, and I can prove it."
Gee.
Now, you're laughing.
Right.
Because you and I know better, right?
Yeah.
But when I first read that, I was like, this person did not just tweet that. And I read it again, and I read it again, and I read it again. And then, of course, curiosity really got the best of me. And I started trolling the comments on that tweet. And the ignorance and anti-Semitism was just like spewing from all of these people in the comments. I could not believe it.
Wow. That's really crazy.
There is a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a very, very long time, especially on our podcast. But at the time that I wanted to have this conversation, it was right around the time that George Floyd was murdered. And I thought to myself, I got to read the room. It isn't the right time to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, and I'm not saying that I feel completely qualified to have the conversation now, but 2 years ago, I really was not in a place where I felt qualified to have this conversation.
Right.
So I thought that at least for this half of the conversation, I would tell a couple of stories to kind of lead us in the direction that I would like this conversation to go. And first and foremost, if you haven't already, if you're listening to this podcast right now, be sure to follow us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our handle is @ChurchosityPod. We want some feedback. We want dialogue. We want conversation. We want you to be a part of this conversation. There is no wrong answer. There is no right answer. There's no wrong question. There's no right question. But just know that we have an open...
There are some wrong answers, I will say.
Yeah, especially the ones that I read in that Twitter post. Touche.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Some wrong answers.
I'm just saying. We pretty much have an open door policy of communication between our listeners and ourselves through our socials. So feel free to chime in, please. So I thought that where I would start is from the beginning. I was born...
Oh, you're going to the very beginning.
In the beginning. Right after I was born, my birth father and my mother got divorced. And the man who raised me from about 7 months old was my stepdad. And so my stepdad and my mom raised me from about when I was a little toddler. And he ended up adopting me when I was like 4.5 years old or something like that, which is where my last name comes from. Brady is not my given last name. Growing up, I never knew who my actual father was. And when I was probably like 5, 6, 7 years old, for some strange reason, my mom and stepdad would take me down to the old Seattle Center Coliseum once a year for the auto show. Do you remember the auto show? Back in the day?
I never went to those.
Dad never took you down to that?
Nah.
It basically was this big, like, convention for, people who had awesome cars. 1 year, Kit from Knight Rider, the old black Camaro, was there with David Hasselhoff. So, like, it's kind of a big deal. But every year, there was this guy who had a van that was all tricked out, and for some reason, my mom and stepdad would make sure that we saw this guy.
Uh-huh.
And then I would end up somehow spending like several hours and then eventually a day or two at this guy's house with his wife.
Weird.
Come to find out, this man was my father.
Oh.
And that was my mother's way of kind of breaking the ice and softening the blow that my stepdad wasn't actually my real dad.
Huh.
And so, that was just kind of weird.
Guess that's one way to do it.
Yeah. I don't recommend that.
Okay.
But fast forward several years later, I'm playing baseball. I'm in the All-Stars. My mother says, hey, would you like me to pick up the phone and call your father to see if he would come watch you play baseball?
Yeah.
So he comes out and watches me play. And like over the course, I think I was 12 or 13 years old. And over the course of probably 10, 12 years, I saw him maybe once or twice a year. We never had a relationship. When I was about 25 years old, there was someone really close to one of my brothers. His best friend was killed in a car accident. And one of the last things that he and I talked about was that it's never too late to have a relationship with your father. Mm. And then after this friend of my brother's was killed, I remembered what he said to me. And so I immediately picked up the phone. This is back when you still had to call information to find people. The internet wasn't a thing yet. And I found my father. Mm. I think it was that very night. I called him on the phone, found out where he lived, and I went over to his house and I had a conversation with him. And so he and I, from that moment, started building a relationship with one another. Mm-hmm. Well, come to find out, my father was Jewish. Hmm.
And you never knew that?
I never knew that. I never knew that my father was Jewish.
Wow.
And there's a whole backstory to his life that I'm not going to, bore all of our listeners to tears with telling. But he and his brothers and his parents, they were very Jewish. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a miraculous story of my paternal grandfather escaping a concentration camp in Russia and emigrating through Canada into the United States of America.
Wow.
So when I see a tweet that says the Holocaust never happened and I can prove it, if I could, I would dig up my grandfather's body and show you the scars on his arms from where he was branded with the Star of David and his call number for attendance in the concentration camp that he escaped from in Russia.
Right.
So, needless to say, over the past 30 plus years, I've been on this journey to trace my Jewish heritage. Okay. Now, mind you, finding out that I do in fact have Jewish heritage at the age of 25, it makes things like the movie Schindler's List hit a little harder.
Yeah.
It makes movies like Saving Private Ryan hit a little harder. Because now I'm looking at it through a different set of eyes.
Right.
Knowing the horrific backstory of my ancestry on both my paternal grandfather's side and my paternal grandmother's side. Mm-hmm. Because my grandfather was Russian, my grandmother was Spanish. They were both Jews, and they have their own backstories that are miraculous. It's literally a miracle that I'm here. And so over the course of time, and with the help of things like seminary for me, I've actually been able to trace my personal Jewish ancestry all the way back to the early 2nd century in Palestine.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah. And it's pretty fascinating. And part of that story is the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, what is all this? What am I getting at here?
What do you want to tell our listeners?
After George Floyd was murdered, which was 2 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, man, already.
There was a lot of tension, outrage, rioting, protesting, You remember all of it, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of anger.
A lot of anger. There were a lot of problems that were all of a sudden coming to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was part of a certain circle of evangelical Christians who would say things like, racism isn't a thing anymore.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I remember that.
I remember one person said to me, the only way that racism could still actually exist is because we're still talking about it.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Those two statements alone have to be two of the most ignorant statements I have ever heard spoken.
Yeah.
And it's very, very close to the ignorance of someone who says that the Holocaust never happened.
Yeah.
There is this unfortunate tribe in evangelical Christianity. And I don't know if it's because they're ignorant. I don't know if it's because they're in denial. I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the conversation that I am here to have right here and now is that systemic racism and white privilege are real, and they are 100% in full effect.
Yeah.
Now, please don't shut off the episode. Please stick with me, because you need to know that much like those ignorant people, I used to be one of those people.
No.
I know it's hard to believe. There used to be a version of Heath Brady who was ignorant. Ignorance means I didn't know what I didn't know.
I never thought that, you never thought that racism wasn't actually a thing anymore, though, did you?
But there was a period in my life where I thought that the reason why racism is obviously an issue is because we're still talking about it.
Oh.
And I would come at it from the vantage point of white people are inflicting some sort of racism on persons of color by still talking about racism. I mean, that was kind of what my level of ignorance was. But let me qualify this, okay? Because I don't want to try and qualify who I used to be by repeating some of the things that I used to say. Let's just take a little trip. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell our listeners a story.
Okay.
So I used to work for Boeing, and I had a coworker, just a wonderful, wonderful gal. She was a black gal, and she was like, to this day, she's one of my most favorite people that I've ever had the honor of knowing. And back in 2015, her and I sat side by side at our desks in our little cubicle area. But back in 2015, when Donald Trump was running for president,
You're right.
And let me just clarify, I was never a fan of Donald Trump. Okay. Never a fan of Donald Trump. Let me just qualify that, okay? Not that I really care, but I just want to qualify that for the sake of this conversation.
You're just painting the picture.
I'm painting the picture. Thank you.
Got it.
Karen and I would have conversations like all of the time, because I was that white guy who grew up in a very diverse neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
And I've mentioned this on previous podcasts, that I didn't grow up with parents who labeled people by the color of their skin or their national origin. It was never the Portuguese kid up the street. It was never the Chinese kid around the corner. It was never the black kid up by the park. It was Orlando, Richard, and Scott. Right. And I never heard my first, quote, racial slur until the 6th grade. I heard a word. I had no idea what it was. I came home. I asked my mother. She was shocked. Where did you hear this word? Right? That was the childhood I grew up with. And so I would say things like, I didn't grow up. I wasn't raised to see color.
How very fortunate of you.
And so, like, I'm that guy. I'm that white guy who, I grew up and all my closest friends were black, which is true. None of that is false. I would tell Karen, listen, I would get on the bus and I would ride all the way down to the south end of Seattle on a Sunday, and I would go to barbecues and church with all my friends from school because all my closest friends, like, I'm not a racist.
Uh-huh.
And I would say white privilege isn't a thing. Like, I was that guy.
You couldn't see it.
I couldn't see it.
Okay.
I couldn't see what Karen was trying to explain to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, The Little Mermaid, the musical The Little Mermaid, came to Seattle, and it was playing at the Fifth Avenue Theater. And you remember how excited I was to go see that musical.
Yeah, it was fun. We went as a family.
It was me and you, one of our friends,
Yeah.
and the girls, our two youngest girls.
Oh, yeah, just the girls. Yeah.
I was really, really excited to go to this musical. But do you remember specifically why I was so excited, Andy, to go see this musical?
I don't remember.
Because everybody was up in a tizzy that they had cast an Asian woman to play Ariel in The Little Mermaid. And I was excited to go so that I could basically irritate all of my racist friends.
Oh, no.
Who were like, I am not going to take my family to go see The Little Mermaid because they're going against the traditional blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, it's
Seriously?
a mermaid, which is a mythological creature, and it's a fictional story, for crying out loud. Like, anyway.
Whoever those people are, I'm unfriending them.
I already have a long time ago.
Okay, good, because I'm like, I don't know.
Those are the kind of people that are tweeting things like the Holocaust never happened, or racism is over. Right?
Okay.
So anyhow, we go down to the Fifth Avenue Theater. We get our seats, and one thing that's different from the Fifth Avenue Theater as opposed to the Paramount Theater is that in the Fifth Avenue Theater, you can take food and beverages into the theater.
Right.
Which you can't do at the Paramount.
I didn't know that at the time.
Either did I. So when we got into the theater and sat down in our seats, I'm looking around and everybody's got concession. Everybody's got food and beverages. There's hot dogs and Cheetos and Snickers bars and, I mean, you name it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to go get some concession. Anybody want anything? And we had all just finished having a really nice dinner, so nobody was really hungry. But everybody said, hey, I could just use a bottle of water. So I get up and I go out to go to the concession stand to get everybody a bottle of water. So I'm just on the hunt for 6 waters, man. So I go out and I get in line at the concession stand. Mm-hmm. There's one single file line. I'm at the back of the line. In front of me is a black man. And in front of him is a white woman who's at the counter being waited on by a black woman. So it's a black female employee who's waiting on a white woman at the concession stand. Next in line is a black man, and then there's me behind him. That's the concession line. Mm-hmm. To the left at the counter is another cash register with a white woman standing behind the cash register, not doing anything.
Okay.
She's just standing there. She looks up and she sees me and she says, "Oh, sir, if you're paying with cash, I can help you over here." And so I just happen to have cash in my wallet, which is weird because who carries cash anymore?
Right.
And so I started to take a step out of the back of the line, and no sooner had I taken my first step than the gentleman in front of me says, "You didn't ask me if I was paying with cash."
Right. Oh.
And I froze. And I looked at this man and I said, "You go right ahead, sir. You were in line before me anyway. Go right ahead." And he looked at me and he looked at the white woman and he looked back at me. He mumbled an expletive and then he stepped out of line and walked away.
Oh, man.
And I was standing there frozen. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, in the moment, all I wanted to do was drop everything and run after this man and apologize to him profusely because I felt like I had done something to upset him.
Right. But you hadn't.
I hadn't, because as I was sitting there in that moment, I had this experience. I had this feeling come over me like I had been born again. Like I had a Saul on the road to Damascus experience with the Lord.
Right.
Because in that moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks. That what that white woman behind the cash register had done was racism. And I benefited from it because of my privilege.
Right.
Because I'm white too. And it hit me like a ton of bricks.
So you saw it.
So I saw it. All the while, the black employee finishes up with the white woman who's at the counter and sends her on her way, and I'm just standing there. And I say to the white woman who just racially offended the black man, I'm good, I'll stay right here.
Yeah, I'm not moving.
I am moving.
Good.
And then when the black woman behind the counter was all done with the customer who was now in front of me, she waved me up and she said, I can take care of you over here. What do you need? And I went up there to the counter and I said, I just need 6 bottles of water.
Yeah.
And I said to the lady, I said, I am so sorry. I don't know what to do right now. And in her own way that I can't repeat because we're a family show, she assured me that I had done enough. And as I was getting ready to pay, she gave me a king-size Snickers bar on the house.
Wow.
So I come walking back into the theater with 6 bottled waters and a Snickers bar, and you looked up at me, and you looked at me, and I looked like I had just seen a ghost. You remember that?
Yeah, you did.
And you were like, is everything okay? And I said, everything's fine. I will explain it to you after we get home.
Yeah.
But that was my moment. That was the moment. And this is back in early December of 2016. I could not wait to get back to work the next day.
To tell
Karen
what
about what had just happened.
Yeah.
Now, what I don't want anyone to hear me say is that I'm some awesome person and that I did some awesome, great, and glorious thing, because I didn't do anything.
No.
Bad or good, or so I thought. Because when I got back to work and I was able to sit down with Karen and tell her my story, word for word, she started to cry.
Oh.
And she said, you see it now. And I said, I see it everywhere, Karen. And I told her about how I had just that urge to drop everything and run after that man. And I wanted to throw my arms around him. I wanted to do something. And she said, no, you did plenty, because you acknowledged the problem in the moment by making it obvious that he was being mistreated because of the color of his skin, and you were going to let him go in front of you.
Yeah.
You called it out. And I was like, I did? And she goes, yes. And so I said, okay, Karen, okay, I feel like I just got reborn. Like I feel like an infant here, right?
Yeah.
What do I do? Like what do I do? You know how when you first become a Christian, like a lot of people when they first become a Christian, especially, like when my father became a Christian, he like shared the gospel with a tree. Like he was just like so on fire for Jesus. He wanted everybody within ear's reach to hear the gospel, right? I felt that way in that moment. Like I wanted to just like grab everybody. Like I wanted to be John the Baptist and grab people by the back of their head and slam them into the water or something,
Right.
And I said to her, I said, Karen, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Like white privilege is a thing. And she says to me, and I will never forget this as long as I live, you use your privilege to take other people's privilege away. I'll never forget that. And so ever since that moment, that's what I've been trying to do when it comes to systemic racism and white privilege.
Right.
And I have to be honest with you. I have to give credit where credit is due. It wasn't like I got to this point all by myself.
No.
Because there is someone very, very close to me who was very, very instrumental in helping me get to this point. And that's my daughter.
Yeah.
My oldest daughter. She, for probably 3 years, would sit in our living room and have hard conversations with me. Some of them were heated, but most of them were gentle, and they were like honest to goodness questions and answers. And it was always reaching an impasse. And so guess who was the second person that I couldn't wait to tell.
It was her.
It was my daughter.
Right.
And I'll never forget the look on her face. She said, "Dad, I have never loved you more or been more proud of you than I am in this moment right now."
Aw.
And again, it's not to toot my own horn. It's simply, it's like I'm giving all of our listeners my testimony here. And I guess that's essentially what this first half of the conversation is me sharing with you my testimony, my of transformation on the inside. Listen, my eyes were opened, and now I see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And there is so much more that I have to say about this whole conversation that I just can't contain in one episode.
Right.
Otherwise, we'd be here for 3 stinking hours or more. So there's definitely more to come. Andy, I know that you have a story too.
Yeah.
So why don't you share your story on this episode as well?
Well, I have a story, and it was just kind of like the beginning of my awakening, I guess you could say. Back in high school, I had some friends that were friends of color. I would hang out with a bunch of different people. Like we said, we grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of diversity in it. So I remember going to the mall one day with a couple of my friends that were not white. We were talking about what stores, hey, let's go over this store. Let's go to the record store. And I said, hey, let's go over to Nordstrom. And they looked at me and they said, we don't go to Nordstrom. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Why wouldn't you go to Nordstrom? I'm thinking because they don't have like cool fashion or something. No. They didn't go to Nordstrom because when they go into Nordstrom, they get followed around the store because everyone that works there thinks that they're going to be a shoplifter. And I didn't believe them. I mean, I believed them. I didn't think they were lying.
Because they were your friends.
Right. But I could not I was like flabbergasted, I guess. I was like, that doesn't really happen, does it? And they're like, we'll show you. We'll go. And it happened. We went in there together and we were followed around the store. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. And I thought that was really horrible, that they would be treated that way. And I mean, I'd never even, the concept of that happening. I mean, maybe as a teenager being singled out, oh, I'm a teenager. Teenagers might be trouble.
Yeah, because I was always followed around 7-Eleven. I looked like a hoodlum.
But it was more than that. Because I never, as a teenager, had any problem going into Nordstrom or any of the other stores. It was just shocking to me,
And that's part of that privilege that you were raised with.
Right.
Because you weren't raised to see color. You weren't raised to pick and choose where you went because of the color of your skin, or were you raised to have to ever worry about where you went because of the color of your skin?
Exactly.
And so when you're around people who don't have the same color of skin as you do, and they tell you that something like that's going to happen, you think that that's ridiculous. That how in the world is that even a thing?
Yeah.
And you have to literally have the experience in front of your own very eyes. Some of us do have to have our own experience to see it for ourselves. So how did that event in your life, and you were a teenager,
right?
How did that event kind of catapult you into the knowledge and understanding of where you're at today?
Well, it took a long time because I didn't fully understand. It was just the beginning. Let's just say that.
Right. That was your infantile stage.
Yeah. I mean, let's just say I have more to this story. My particular friend, who I was really good friends with, her and I went to a school in our city that was very, very diverse. A lot of, actually the white people were in the minority at this particular school. And I really loved this school and I loved how diverse it was. And I guess as a white kid, I felt cool because I went to this particular school and I felt accepted by all different kinds of people. And I thought that it was really awesome to make friends with all sorts of different people from different cultures and things like that. For my friend to share her heart with me when we were at the mall, I mean, we were there, I was there with like three other people, but they all shared their heart with me and let me into their world by telling me about this. You know, they didn't have to do that, but they let me into their world. And when I went to school with them, they let me into their world. I was their friend. I went over to their houses. I spent time with them. I got to hear, you know, them sharing that with me. I felt honored that they would tell me about that and clue me in. And my journey began at that point. Well, fast forward, I was having a little too much fun at that school, and my dad was not happy about it. And so we ended up...
You were having a little too much fun.
I did have a lot of fun at that
In the
school.
extracurricular activities department?
Well, my grades were a little bit not what he expected. And
right.
He took me out of there and he put me into a virtually all-white private school.
Oh, gosh.
And I had to go to all my friends and tell them that I was leaving that school, and I had to tell them what school I was going to end up going to. And my one friend who I was closest to, she never spoke to me again. And for the longest time, I could not figure out why she wouldn't speak to me ever again. Like, she was so upset and mad at me. I mean, I still can't fully grasp why, but I have a better understanding now. And I'm 50 years old, and this still bothers me.
Right.
I still think back. It's because she let me into her world.
Right.
And her world, you know, here I have the privilege of, you know, being able to be like, I can go into her world. I can go into her school.
Exactly.
And now, you know, here I was, that wasn't good enough, maybe in her opinion, or it wasn't good enough for my father, you know, that I have to go now to an all-white school. And
not to mention the fact that you also had the privilege to be able to choose what school you went to.
Yeah. So it really wrecked me. I was really upset. Thinking about it now, I feel horrible, and I wish that things could have gone differently back then. But I mean, I really don't know what I could have done. Except make sure my grades were good so I wouldn't have been pulled out of that school. But still, thinking back, the gift that they gave me, of the gift of, you know, helping me to see a little bit into their world and what they had to deal with. And it was an honor, and I'm very thankful for that experience. Yeah.
The point that you're really making there, Andy, it's gonna catapult us into the next episode, because that really is going to be one of the major bullet points around this conversation, and that is that you listened to them.
Yeah.
You sat down and you listened to them. You allowed them to, the way you put it, they brought you into their world and sat you down, and you listened to what they had to say.
Yeah.
You let them tell you what their world was like. You let them tell you what their culture was like.
Yeah.
You let them tell you what their experience in life was like.
And showed me.
And then showed you. Exactly.
Yeah.
And see, now, much like you, as I mentioned before, all through my childhood, all of my dearest, closest friends were not white. But I never had conversations with any of my friends about what their world was actually like.
I see.
And I think that is the number one reason why I remained so ignorant for so long. Because you had your experience with your friends when you were 15. My experience that occurred at the Little Mermaid musical wasn't until I was, 2016? So what is that? It's 8 years ago. So I'm 42.
Right.
So, you know, or 44. You know, it took a lot longer for me to see it. Just like you had to experience it at Nordstrom,
Yeah.
I had to experience it at The Little Mermaid. I had to experience it for myself.
Right.
A long time ago on our podcast, and I think this was like in the first season of our podcast, I talked about 2 verses in Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. And I focused on verse 9, and I promised our listeners that one day I would come back and talk about verse 8.
Oh.
Verse 9 says, "Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and needy." But verse 8 says, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all the unfortunate." Guess what I'm doing now?
Speaking up.
I'm opening my mouth. It's time to speak for those who don't have the privilege to speak.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to talk about. We want to ask some hard questions. We want to ask questions like, what can we do? Where do we start? What is the answer? Is there a solution? And how does all of this impact the church? How does all of this influence the church? How should the church be having this conversation itself? Those are the questions, those are the things that we want to talk about. And a whole heck of a lot more, because we're just getting started having this conversation. Thank you for not turning off this episode and listening all the way through.
Right.
We will continue this conversation on the next episode. But for now, that brings us to this week's proof that we're living in the last days. All right, so there's something crazy insane going on in the country that I have to talk about.
Oh, really?
It's extremely laughable, in my opinion.
Okay.
Well, first of all, in case our listeners aren't aware, a handful of weeks ago, you and I and the girls took a trip to Disney World.
We did.
We were gone for a week over spring break, and we went down to Disney World. We were down in Florida for a week. The weather was really, really great, except for the last day. It poured down rain. But hey, we're native Seattleites. We're Puget Sound dwellers. Rain doesn't hurt us. We don't melt.
We don't melt.
We don't melt.
Yeah.
Since we returned from Florida, I have not heard a single person talk about COVID. Not once.
Well, that's kind of
until
refreshing.
yesterday.
Oh, until yesterday.
Here's the context of the conversation that I was a part of that revolved around, quote, COVID.
Okay.
It turns out, because I don't watch the news. I should watch the news, but I don't. I'd rather fall down the rabbit holes of Twitter than watch the news.
Okay.
You pay more attention to the news now more than I do, I would imagine. So it was probably old news when it was told to me just yesterday that many of the, quote, international airports in the United States of America are relaxing mask mandates in the airports now.
Okay.
And so are a lot of the airlines.
Okay.
So the context of the conversation was there's going to be conflict now, because if not every airline is enforcing the mask thing, say that you are in an airport and you're transferring from one flight to another, and your first flight didn't mandate masks, your airport that you're in right now doesn't mandate masks, but then you go to get on an airplane where that airline says you got to put a mask on,
Right.
or the other way around. You follow me?
Yeah, it could be a problem.
Not all of the airports and airlines are complying with this. It's like still kind of in its beginning stages, I think.
Okay.
And then I hear that the White House,
Yes.
the federal government, is talking about suing TSA for not relaxing mask mandates in the airports now.
For not relaxing.
For not relaxing them.
Oh, boy.
And when I was in the middle of sipping my coffee when this was said to me, and let's just say that my desk became a sprinkler
Yeah.
and coffee shot through my nostrils, because this is so incredibly stinking laughable.
Yeah.
Because it just seems like yesterday that the White House, the federal government, was going to sue the state of Florida because the governor of the state of Florida refused to mandate mask wearing.
So the opposite.
And now it's like the federal government has turned on its own head.
Right.
Oh my gosh, it's so laughable to me. And it reminds me of one of my favorite verses in the Psalms that says, "Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men in whom there is no salvation." You can't trust these people because they don't know what they're doing anymore. It's ridiculous. So my point is that now, if the federal government is on the side of no more fear-mongering in our hearts and minds, and flipping on itself and threatening to sue over masks not being relaxed, mask mandates not being relaxed, I don't know about you, Andy,
right?
But I believe that is definitely proof that we are, in fact, living in the last days.
And that is all we have to say about that.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Churchosity Podcast, the show where we try to give you the Gen X take on church culture. And thank you once again, as always, to my amazing co-host and adorable wife.
You're welcome, honey. Be sure to follow us on all the socials. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is @ChurchosityPod. Please drop us a message and give us your feedback. We'd really love to hear from you.
And if you happen to be listening to this episode on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please be sure to give us a rating. 5 stars are always appreciated, but not required. And if you feel led, go ahead and leave us a review as well. The ratings and reviews not only boost the popularity of Churchosity Podcast, but they also make it a whole lot easier for other people to find us. And you can also spread the word about Churchosity Podcast if you just simply tell a friend to pull up and participate in what we're doing here.
Yeah, let them be a part of the conversation too.
But always remember that the goal of our instruction is love.
From a pure heart.
And from a good conscience.
And a sincere faith.
So we thank all of you once again for listening, and we hope to catch you on the next episode of the Churchosity Podcast. Peace.